The Rodi, Sri Lanka's mysterious untouchables. The Rodi are Sri Lanka's only untouchables. By all counts, they are very strange people. They live in little villages known as kuppayam or gubbaeyam. They call themselves by a special name Gadi and others as Baggiri. Their males have Villiya and females Valli suffixed to their names. They were divided into various clans, had a distinct mythical tradition tracing their descent from a cannibalistic princess, and until recent times hunted like the Veddas. They also preserved remnants of an ancient language quite distinct from Sinhala. All of this suggests that the Rodi were originally a tribal people vastly different from the Sinhalese among whom they live today. One of the earliest notices of the Rodi comes from the Englishman Robert Knox, who says in his historical relation of Ceylon, 1681, the predecessors of these people, from whom they sprang, were Veddas, which signifies hunters to whom it did belong to catch and bring venison for the king's table. But instead of venison they brought man's flesh, unknown, which the king, liking so well, commanded to bring him more of the same sort of venison. The king's barber chanced to know what flesh it was, and discovered it to him, at which the king was so enraged, that he accounted death too good for them, and to punish only those persons that had so offended, not a sufficient recompense for so great an affront and injury as he had sustained by them. Forthwith therefore he established a decree that all, both great and small, that were of that rank or tribe, should be expelled from dwelling among the inhabitants of the land, and not to be admitted to use or enjoy the benefit of any means, or ways, or callings whatsoever, to provide themselves sustenance, but that they should beg, from generation to generation, from door to door, through the kingdom, and to be looked upon and esteemed by all people to be so base and odious, as not possibly to be more. This may perhaps explain the untouchable status of the caste. However, is there more to it? Hugh Neville, in his paper The Gadi or Rodi Race in Ceylon, contributed to the Tufrobanian of June 1887 records the following row. I tradition told to him by an aged Rodiya, at Parakramabahu's court the venison was provided by a certain Vedda archer, who during a scarcity of game substituted the flesh of a boy he met in the jungle, and provided it as venison for the royal household. On the following day Navaratna Valli, the beautiful and idolized daughter of the king, called the Vedda aside and said emphatically, just so, Vedda, bring just such venison again, or fear my anger. It would seem that the princess had penetrated the horrible deception, but fascinated by a sudden longing for human flesh, determined to gratify her morbid craving, terrified at the risk of exposure, the Vedda continued to waylay youths in the woods, and purveyed their flesh to the royal kitchen, urged on by the princess. At last the whole country took alarm at the mysterious disappearance of so many youths, and dark and sinister rumors began to circulate that a devil haunted the vicinity of the court, preying on young men, whose bodies were devoured by it. At this crisis a barber who happened to be waiting at the palace for audience, and who had to complain of the disappearance of his only son, on the previous day, having been long in waiting, was given by servants of the royal scullery a leaf of rice and venison curry. Just as the bereaved father was about to put the first mouthful to his lip, he noticed on his leaf the deformed knuckle of the little finger of a boy. Recognizing it by the deformity as that of his son, he at once feigned sickness and a choleric attack, and explaining that the unwanted smell of meat after his long fast had made him ill, he left his food untasted and crawled away. When once beyond the purlieus of the palace, he quickly spread the alarm that the king himself was killing and eating the youths of the city. On this an angry crowd collected at once at the palace, demanding justice of the king against the king. The facts then came to light, and the king, stripping his daughter of her ornaments, and calling out a scavenger, then sweeping out a neighboring yard, gave her to him as wife, and sent her away to earn her living in her husband's class. However, is it possible that the tales of cannibalism among their mythical ancestors was meant to hide a darker secret, that of human sacrifice? M.D. Rabhavan, in his book, Handsome Beggars, The Rodias of Ceylon, 1957, argued that the caste was in fact descended from a Kali-worshipping Austroasiatic tribe tribe of eastern India. In his report, he cited the invocations to their legendary ancestress Valli, which seem to have preserved memories of Kali worship and human sacrifice such as was found in eastern India until fairly recent times, says Raghavan. The references to her worship in a sacred grove of trees, her braided bluish dresses, her resplendent figure, her continuous dancing movements, her strings of pearls, incantations against diseases, her wreaths of flowers, her fearsome necklace, her triumphal progress, her house-to-house visits accompanied by drumming, the rejoicing of the Naga world, offerings of flesh and blood which flow like the Ganga, all these and more are unmistakable as associated with the ceremonial cult of Kali, the most active of the early cults of India. The fearsome necklace of corals is the garland of human skulls round the neck of the awe-inspiring Kali. Manindu, who gives her permission, is here the great Lord Shiva, and the reference is to the permission which Shiva vouchsafed to her, to betake herself to the mortals below, where she would be received and worshipped with proper rituals. Awe-inspiring offerings are the human bloody sacrifices. It is therefore quite possible that the ancestors of the Rodi engaged in human sacrifices to appease their mythical ancestress Valli, who would have been looked upon as a manifestation of the black goddess Kali. Human sacrifices were offered in the remote eastern parts of India until relatively recent times, much of it to Kali. That a tribal group that had its origins in eastern India could have continued such a practice is quite possible, especially since such a sanguinary legacy could also explain their untouchable status among the Sinhalese. This may also account for the legends of cannibalism among their mythical ancestress. Although said to be a princess, the lady's noble lineage must have been inspired by the ancient Kandyan practice of handing over high-born women to the Rodi as punishment. Tribal origin. The traditions of the Rodi themselves held that they came over from India as a tribe quite apart from the Sinhalese, not with the Vijayanagan migration in the 6th or 5th century BC, but with the coming of the Baggiri tree brought hither by Sanghamitta in the 3rd century BC. A.M. Ferguson observed in his paper The Rodias of Ceylon contributed to the Monthly Literary Register of 1895. On a close examination, it has been ascertained from several old and well-informed men of the caste that according to a legend prevalent among them, their first ancestors were Veddas or hunters, and that they trace their origin to India. They first landed in the retinue which followed the transportation to Anuradhapura across the sea, of the sacred Bo tree, by Sanghamitta about 2,000 years ago. The Rodi thus seem to have originally belonged to an Austroasiatic stock of eastern India, much like the Munda-speaking tribes there, like the Hos, Birhars and Santals, tribal peoples who still live in those parts. This kind of man has sparse body and facial hair. Cohabitation with Sinhalese explains the development of more hirsute traits, but even this lack of hairiness among them was so conspicuous enough as to prompt A.M. Ferguson to remark of them in 1895, the men mostly have very short beards, or shave them completely. A Rodi has never been known to have a long flowing beard. The term by which the Rodi call themselves Gadi also suggests a connection with the Munda-speaking tribes of eastern India. Hugh Neville in his paper The Gadi or Rodi race in Ceylon contributed to the Toprobanian of August 1887 thought that the word Gadi came from Kata or Gada red, to which he connects Magadha, which he believes to be a relic of an ancient name of the Red Mother, or goddess mother of this race, a name perpetuated, though translated, in the Simpunachimar, the Red Chief, one of some Tamils of today. However, it is more likely that the word is connected to such terms as ho and ho, as in the form Burhor used by the Munda-speaking peoples to designate themselves. These folk refer to themselves simply as men. The tribal appellation of the Mun, as is Horomen. The Santals call themselves Horhapan, children of man. The tribal name of the Kirkus, Kirku, is merely the plural of Koroman and so literally means men, as does the tribal name of the Korkus, Ko. In speeches such as Santali, connected forms also denote kinship. For example, Kor and Kuri and Korhapan son and Kurihapan daughter. Similarly, in the Rodi speech we come across Gadi Bilindasan, Gadi Bilindi daughter, and Gadi Kaveni wife. A brother is called Ekaange Gadiya and a sister Ekaange Gadi. The prototype of the Munda term for man was something like Kodo, since forms with H such as Mun, Ahora seem to have derived from an older form containing an initial K, as is suggested by Munda tribal designations such as Kirku, while the older form of the peculiar Munda R was evidently a retroflex D, as is suggested by the fact that Munda represents Old Indo-Aryan forms containing retroflex D as R and the possession of such alternating forms as Kota and Korawan. It is possible that it was a form such as Kodo that gave rise to the Ro I term for themselves Gadi, especially since there is evidence to show that the Ro I speech had softened K to G at some point in time. Neville, August 1887, notes, in the Rodi language each K is replaced by a G and Duku would then become a Gu. Kiria would be Jiria. Kiramali be Jirmali, former hunter tradition, another indicator suggesting a tribal past of the Ro I was their hunter tradition. This is borne out by Robert Knox, who in his Historical Relation of Ceylon, 1681, says, the predecessors of these people, from whom this sprang, were Dada Veddas, which signifies hunters, to whom it did belong to catch and bring venison for the king's table. He adds that there are some of this sort of people who dwell in remote parts distant from any towns and shoot deer and sell them where they fall in the woods, for if they should but touch them, none would buy them. A tribal origin of the Ro I is also suggested by their division in former times into exogamous clans. Hugh Neville in his paper on the Rodi contributed to the Top Robanian of June 1887 recorded that Rodi were divided into 12 exogamous clans with names like Alpaga, Tulina, Tyaringa, Maitangala, Napla, Wapola, and U. The members of any of these could only marry into one of the other 11. The daughters belonged to the clan of the mother, and the sons alone followed the father's clan. This feature is also found among the tribal Munda-speaking Austroasiatic folk of eastern India, who are likewise divided into a number of exogamous clans. The Santals, for instance, are known to have been formerly divided into 12 exogamous clans. And finally we come to a most distinct tribal marker of theirs, the Rodi speech, which may well be the survival of an ancient Munda tongue spoken by the primitive hill tribes of eastern India. Many are the Ro I words that are unrelated to Sinhala, Tamil or any other local language. These include Bakuragat, Dulumu fire, Hijulu milk, Harubu salt, Harugu light, Lana fruit, Miji I boiled rice, Jiraba day, Lavana month, Madala door, Kara I head, Pikirita belly, Dagula hand, Balalu teeth, Ledabul and Busa dog. They also have peculiar verbs like Miganavato eat, Likanava to die, Lukanava to beat, Yepanava to give, Tabanava to bury and Disanava to go. The Ro I vocabulary does not at the present day show much resemblance to Munda words or forms, but this may be due to divergence from a common source at a very early period. A few correspondences may however perhaps be seen in such Ro I forms as Dagula hand, Karyatig, and Borlu stones, Karyabiruhil. What all this suggests is that the Rodi originally possessed a distinct lexicon which over the years incorporated Sinhala vocables and finally assumed a grammatical structure similar to Sinhala. Secret language. Nareka Waratunj in her study Aspects of Ethnicity and Gender among the Rodi of Sri Lanka, 1988, found that in its present form the Rodi language functioned as a secret language of a marginalized group. She found that generally daily conversations were carried out in Sinhala with a couple of words from their own language thrown in, Sinhala itself being spoken with a slightly different intonation reflecting the lack of long vowels except long A in their own language. She found that the older generations claimed a knowledge of their own language and were able to demonstrate it extensively. She found it was to some extent valued as a secret language. For example, an elderly woman named Kukulumali told her, "It is a good language because no one else can understand it." Another, much younger man told her, "It is good to keep our language. We can talk between the two of us secretly in your presence. It's useful to us. For example, when the police come in search of us, we can inform each other secretly and hide the kasipu, illicit liquor, under their noses." So, it is clear that the Rodi had their own speech which they used to communicate among themselves at times as a sort of secret language. However, what is so curious is why they had to devise another secret language to exclude others from their conversations. N.T. Karunatilaka in his book Diduru or Abadavidi, 1989, gives specimens of a peculiar secret language that was used by the Rodi. The language he tells us was called Adibasava and consisted of a word for each letter and diacritic. Thus A equals Adi, I equals Edi, U equals Udi, K equals Karalanti, G equals Garan, T equals Tayan, N equals Nayan, D equals Darabale. Diacritics included AZ for the long vowel A, Teen for A, Tren for E and Sik for vowel stop. Thus to say Bala one had to say Baran Layan Siklan AZ. To say Vadrasa one had to say Vain Daran Tuvalrantin Sayan Sik Sayan. This was perhaps a sort of rogue's language of a kind like the rogue's cant once supposed to have been invented by Cock Laurel, a legendary rogue said to be the most notorious knave that ever lived and used by thieves, beggars and vagabonds of various descriptions in Great Britain a couple of centuries ago. Such secret languages known as cryptolects were formerly used by French bandits and Jewish cattle traders in Germany, whose secret jargon, nicknamed Laschenkautisch sacred language, survived until fairly recent times. It has been found that historically marginalized groups like Jews, Gypsies and beggars have tended to develop cryptolects, with both Romani and Yiddish being major sources of European underworld vocabularies. Thus, it is possible that the Rodi of certain areas devised the Adibasava with a similar motive, to exclude others from their discourses, especially since they were a marginalized, economically depressed group who often had to resort to illegal activities for a living. However, one wonders why they had to improvise it when they already had a language that could have sufficed for the purpose.